Garrett, what does the president mean exactly when he writes his termination can't come soon enough, talking about the Fed chair?
It's a tough question to answer, honestly, Anna. I think what we see here is someone who has been a foil for President Trump almost since the president appointed him during his first term. The President Trump has regularly speculated about firing Jerome Powell. He's complained about his unwillingness, in the president's view, to lower interest rates fast enough. And there you see in that Truth Social post kind of a passive voice speculation about firing Powell. Now, it's been sort of understood that it's not possible to fire the Fed chair before the end of his term, which in this particular case comes up in 2026. Up until now, if there's anyone who could within the executive branch, it would be the president, which makes his formulation of that post all the more curious. Normally, you would say that this is a position that cannot be fired within the federal government. That's certainly Powell's view of his position. But the president has already fired several other nominally independent regulators across the federal government, and the Supreme Court is looking into that question even as we speak. So, again, sort of a veiled threat of some kind from the president, but not a lot of specificity there.
Brian, tell us more, though, about the comments we heard from the Fed chair that has apparently really set the president off.
Yeah, well, I mean, he was saying that the tariff policies are going to throw the United States economy into definitely more uncertainty that at least they had planned for. So the Federal Reserve chairman telling the Economic Club of Chicago yesterday that the tariffs were larger than they had expected. And for that reason, they expect the U.S. economy to grow slower and for price pressures and for inflation to go higher as a result of these policies. Take a listen to the Fed chair yesterday.
Our obligation is to keep longer-term inflation expectations well anchored and to make certain that a one-time increase in the price level does not become an ongoing inflation problem. We may find ourselves in the challenging scenario in which our dual mandate goals are in tension. If that were to occur, we would consider how far the economy is from each goal and the potentially different time horizons over which those respective gaps would be anticipated to close.
I want to point out that that challenging scenario is one that the Federal Reserve has been in before during Trump's first term, during the trade war with China as well, where it was actually the ratcheting up of the tariff conversation that led the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates with the economic uncertainty, financial markets also roiling at the time. So maybe the similar playbook here, although I want to point out the Fed has been very adamant they do not make interest rate moves based off of, politics. But if the economy and the financial markets do react negatively, maybe that puts the Fed in an uncomfortable position to act. He quoted Ferris Bueller, actually, the Fed chair yesterday, saying life moves pretty fast, clearly tariff policy as well.
Well, and this is a Fed chair, Jeff, who has shown independence, even though he was appointed by President Trump, actually in his first term. Now he's repeatedly taken on some heat from the president, who's called for his resignation multiple times. The Fed chair, Jerome Powell, has said it's not permitted under law for him to be fired. So what do you make of this growing tension between these two?
Couple things. Number one, President Trump, as you rightly say, appointed Fed Chair Powell during his first term, passing over at the time Janet Yellen, who was the Fed chair and then ended up becoming President Biden's Treasury Secretary. President Biden reappointed him, and that may give President Trump another opportunity to blame Biden, which is something that he likes to do. In general, I would say my analysis is President Trump likes to have a foil, whether that is the Fed chair, whether that is the media, whether that is his predecessor. That's something that he likes very much. He needs to have something or someone to blame. And right now, he's got a lot of problems. And so he's looking for people to point the finger at.
As we've mentioned, Jason, we have seen this president get rid of IGs, FBI directors, people who traditionally would seem off limits. And so normally we would say he couldn't fire someone from an independent agency, full stop. But that question is currently before the Supreme Court right now, with a ruling expected at any time. What is your reaction, Jason, to the president's threat to now terminate Powell? Should we take it seriously?
I think we absolutely should take it seriously. First of all, let's understand what Powell did wrong. He stated the obvious. He said something that every economist is saying, which is these tariffs are going to cause higher inflation and higher unemployment. In his first term, there were two big constraints on firing Powell. The first was the fear of what the market reaction would be. The second was the constraint from the Supreme Court. Well, the president has shown that he cares much less about markets than he did in his first term. I don't know how much of a restraint that will be on him. And the court is anyone's guess what they will decide in these other cases and the implications that would have for the president wielding, unlimited power over the executive branch, including the Federal Reserve.
You do have to wonder how long the president can just sort of brush off what we're seeing on Wall Street right now. Obviously, Wall Street was rattled by those comments from Jerome Powell yesterday. We saw the Dow close down 700 points, and right now it's on target to have another negative day. Right now, again, Jason, this appears to be reaction to the potential downturn of the economy. Do you agree with Powell's assessment of the tariff impact and the state of the economy?
Absolutely. I don't know an economist that doesn't think that we're going to get higher inflation and lower growth because of these tariffs. The debate is whether the growth is going to be like 0.03, so you don't have a recession, or minus something, which would be a recession. But you're just debating shades of badness. And for the Fed, this is particularly difficult. When the inflation rate rises, they like to raise interest rates to cool the economy down. When the unemployment rate rises, they like to cut interest rates to, help fix the economy. They can't do both of those. And so they don't have a good answer. The only good answer to the economic quandary we're in isn't the Fed solving a problem it can't solve. It would be the president dropping his insistence on these huge, destabilizing, harmful tariffs.
So let's talk to Garrett about that piece, because the president continues to meet with foreign leaders for tariff negotiations. Yesterday it was Japan. Today it's Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. Garrett, what should we expect from this meeting today?
Well, the Italian prime minister represents a far-right party in Italy. She's sort of culturally aligned with President Trump, seen to be one of the most conservative leaders in Western Europe. So there should be some positive vibes from this meeting. But Italy also has a significant trade surplus with the United States. The U.S. in a trade debt to Italy, which is not something the president would like, nor really like the fact that Italy is a laggard when it comes to defense spending, and they're short of the NATO goal of 2% of their GDP. So some thorny issues to hash out with a leader who might otherwise be seen as something of a bridge between this president and the European Union. We will watch this all play out, as we've gotten used to seeing in an Oval Office meeting. The two are expected to have around 1 o'clock today, Anna.
Jeff?
In a previous life, I covered the European Union in Brussels, and I think it's important to note that the EU negotiates as a bloc on trade. So Meloni coming today is not just representing her country, Italy. She's representing 27 nations.
And she's been called Europe's Trump whisperer.
Ding, ding, ding. There's a reason why she's coming and not the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who is not necessarily seen in Trump world as an interlocutor that they want to deal with. So it was pretty strategic of the EU to send the Italian Prime Minister.
I also wonder how much of the optics is sort of giving the president what he wants to begin with, that he can then claim, some kind of victory just by having the show of all these leaders coming to him and wanting to meet with him directly. I mean, he even tweeted about that this morning or put out a social media post. Do you think that that is the goal in some ways?
Oh, I think it's a big part of the goal. The optics matter a lot to this White House and to this president. He wants to see and he wants to show that leaders are coming, that leaders are calling, that leaders want to make a deal. He likes very much to be the deal maker in chief. And if he shows the world, if he shows his constituents that others are coming and I don't want to say bending the knee, but at least coming and doing what he wants, that's a win for President Trump.
The president, Brian, has said that these tariffs would be bringing in $2 billion a day of revenue to the U.S. government. But then there was some new data that just came out that really suggests that's not happening. What are the facts?
Yeah, and that's coming from his own CBP in a statement to CNBC saying that the real figure is actually somewhere closer to $500 million. That's well short of what the president has said of $2 billion per day. But I think what's even more important than the actual number itself is the kind of rhetorics around who's actually paying it. Because I want to point out that when it comes to these import fees, really it's an American importing company that in many cases is the one that has to fill out the forms to say, hey, here's the tariff that we need to pay, and then they pay CBP that fee. So it's not the CCP or the European Union that's paying those fees. It's American companies that are bringing those goods into the United States that are now facing that higher levy. And this all kind of puts into this conversation what we need to remember, which is that ultimately these costs could get passed down to consumers. It's not the governments that really pay them. It is the American buyer that is going to face those price increases when those companies pass it on to them.